The start of Season 12 has brought about some controversial changes. Zeri, an ADC that steals shields, was released. We got some new mage items in the preseason that made every assassin main summit their monitors. And the new proposed changes coming to damage, shielding, and healing look like they're going to be drawing games out at least a little bit longer. Basically what this means is that the early game is a little safer from assassins. They'll need to land every piece of their combo to kill someone instead of being able to one-shot anyone at level 6 by pressing one button. I'm talking to you, Zed. As a champion, Kayle's identity feels pretty out of place with recent years, and especially following her rework. She's a top lane champion that provides no tankiness, has practically zero sustain and no lane pressure until level 6. Now if you look at the most picked top laners in the current patch, you can tell me that they would gladly leave Kayle alone until level 6 so that I can say that you are very, very wrong. One could look at statistics for Kayle and say that she's doing exceptionally well, but even in the matchups where she's favored, she's winning those because her scaling is simply better than her opponents. If you lose lane to a Kayle, you absolutely deserve to be bullied because she doesn't do anything in lane outside of maybe a level 1 trade. When it comes to playing Kayle, the process is something like this. You queue up, you do next to nothing in lane for 20 minutes, you get 3 items, and you usually win the game. While the guarantee of LP is nice and all, it is also excruciatingly boring. So in my quest to liven up Kayle's early game gameplay, I started Theorycrafting and limit testing different AD builds. Lethal Tempo featuring Wit's End, Press the Attack with Blade of the Ruined King, Fleet Footwork with Kraken Slayer. None of them felt as successful as the core that I finally found that would change Kayle's identity forever. You know, now that I look at this kind of looks like an outdated Sivir build. Oh hey, how'd that get there? These are the runes. Sickening, I know, not running Yellow Tree on Kayle, but this complements her modern playstyle better than you might think. As a professional Kayle player who has never tried to branch out into a single other champion and is extremely high elo, you should take 100% of everything that I say at face value, because if there are 2 things that League of Legends players are great at, it's understanding when something's clearly written up as a joke, reading in between the lines, and basic arithmetic. You don't even have to take my word for this Kayle build, because today I've brought in a guest to explain the grievances of modern Kayle, a guest that has a lot of things we can talk about and specializes in clips featuring Sion in the bot lane. Take it away, Skooch.
Historically, Kayle has been a DPS champion, and prior to her rework, she had an immediate presence in lane. Then, in the spring of 2019, Riot Games got their best goons together and tried to kill Kayle. Their attempt didn't succeed, but they did leave her with injuries so bad that she underwent reconstructive surgeries and came out looking like a Mobile Legends character. To this day, Kayle is a comatose version of her previous self that is so unresponsive that you may as well call her a vegetable. Because she's Kayle. Range at level 1, gone. Constant AoE damage by level 10, obliterated. Stacking passive resistant shred, removed. LP, minus 30, hotel, triviago. All of these things were then shifted into much slower parts of her kit. Like, Riot said, what if it was Kayle, but only late game? Which means that they completely neutralized her early game. To prove my point, let's see what her kit contains at level 3. Her Q is a slow-moving skill shot. The base damage is nice, but do you want to see this crazy way to counter this move? And now, Kayle is down 70 mana and has to wait 12 seconds to cast it again. Kayle's W is a brief heal that also grants movement speed, and it costs 90 mana at level 1. That's only 10 mana less than some ultimates, and what does Kayle get? Roughly the same movement speed as Quinn's W passive, without the bonus damage or attack speed, and a heal that equals the value of a Russian ruble. Oh, that joke is topical. Finally, Kayle's E is probably the only decent part of her early game. Passively, she deals bonus magic damage with each auto attack, and the active is an auto attack reset that deals bonus execute damage. With top lane being in the state that it is, playing Kayle is basically asking to lose, because unless you get an amazing trade at level 1, you can't do anything against your opponent until at least level 6. With objective bounties, turret platings, and the overall aggressive nature of most top laners, you're lucky if you can build beyond beyond a leeching leer. Kayle is only good once she obtains a combination of stats, and the AP build just doesn't do that aspect particularly well. Now, if only there was a set of items that allowed Kayle to get stats that benefited her abilities, had a really good component piece, and helped shore up her weaknesses early game. If only.
Kayle's biggest weaknesses early game come from her lack of ability to trade with basically every bruiser champion. Champions that have the similar weakness make up for it by contributing damage, or mobility, or tankiness, and let's take a look at some popular top lane champions to compare. Fiora has a dash, sustain, and the ability to reflect a piece of CC and damage. Tryndamere has a dash, sustain, and the ability to into lane, but still win. Aatrox has a dash, sustain, and the hidden passive of being the only champion that is greatly affected by grievous wounds. Irelia has a dash, sustain, and her passive gives her bonus magic damage on hit on top of stacking attack speed. Hey, wait a minute. Kayle's second biggest weakness is that her late game viability is locked behind, well, getting to late game and getting the items necessary to scale up. Like Skooch mentioned earlier, the components for Riftmaker or Nashor's Tooth aren't all that intimidating or powerful on Kayle by themselves compared to Vampiric Scepter on Irelia, Iron Spike Whip on Fiora, or Serena Dirk on basically any assassin. Finally, when it comes to playstyle, Kayle is little more than an ADC with some utility built in, meaning that in this game where assassins can run matches over, most of the damage that Kayle can do is dealt in the first couple of seconds. Honestly, while her strength may be taking over full team fights at the very end of a game, even the regular AP-centric build struggles to make that level of impact until 3 items have been completed, and until then, 2v2 or 3v3 skirmishes are where she shines best. You start Doran's Blade and a health pot, but if you're feeling extra greedy, a longsword and a refillable potion isn't a bad option either, and if you go Corrupting Pot, I will find you. First we rush Gale Force because it makes for a great pun. The stats themselves are pretty alright, but the most important thing is this component right here. For 1300 gold, Kayle now does 20 bonus damage to minions, which makes farming and getting gold for items even easier. It also massively increases her auto attack damage output, since the attack speed scales well with her regular and E passes, in turn making her single target trades a little more lethal. The completed item itself has a dual effect. Passively, Kayle now gets stacking movement speed. This may not seem like a big deal, but when one of Kayle's strengths so happens to be split pushing and wave clear, the ability to rotate to lanes faster is stronger than you might think. It also helps contribute to her mobility in a team fight so that she can dodge those important skill shots. Then, there's the active portion. Not only does it give Kayle another magic-based source of execution, which is pretty funny if I'm being honest, but it also gives her a dash. Kayle, a champion cursed with immobility, now has a dash. Granted, it's a dash on a pretty long cooldown, but hey, we take what wins we can get. For my second item, I like to build Essence Reaver. It combos well with a Q auto or an auto E for a pretty spicy hit of damage that, if used with an aggressive Gale Force dash, can catch a lot of people off guard. Because nobody buys these items on Kayle. Added bonuses are the mana refund to keep sustaining Kayle, which you can get off of her E for free, the cooldown reduction, and the 45 damage that scales into her abilities. I have experimented with other items that you typically see ADCs build second, like Collector or Rapid Fire Cannon, but none of the options felt nearly as satisfying or consistent. Collector requires the champion to already have unmatched kill pressure, which Kayle doesn't have regardless of what item she gets second, and Rapid Fire Cannon feels weak against even a single piece of cloth armor, so Essence Reaver it is. Third and final core item, the Storm Razor. This is an odd one that I've considered swapping out for other things like Runaan's, Infinity Edge, Collector again, and even Phantom Dancer. What ultimately sells me on this item specifically is how it contributes to the rest of the build and the idea that I'm going for here. To make matters simple, I'm trying to make Kayle a hard-hitting, burst-centric ADC that scales earlier and demolishes her opponent in quick skirmishes while still being an effective split pusher. It seemed reasonable to me that I should give Kayle another source of burst, adding on to the likes of Essence Reaver that also lets her slow enemies on her first hit. Plus, Storm Razor is a cheap item, so why not? And the burst of magic damage is also counted as flat damage against towers, meaning that it isn't reduced by the tower's resistances. Another added bonus of building this way is that Kayle's waves can crit independently of her regular auto attacks based on her critical strike chance, the damage of which scales with bonus AD. In fact, every single one of Kayle's abilities, save for her W, scale with bonus AD, so you're not missing out on much by building the stat itself. For boots, you can build whatever you feel is necessary for the game. Berserker's Greaves are the best way to go, but since you're already getting plenty of attack speed from Kayle's passive and the items for this build, they're not a must-buy item. They're good for melee matchups, but if the enemy team is stacking CC or has multiple assassins, the defensive boots aren't terrible either. And now that we have our build and know why we have these specific items, the next most important thing to address is our runes. I'm running First Strike as my keystone on Kayle, not because it's strictly better than Press the Attack or Lethal Tempo, but because this build is about playing as little Kayle as possible. Since our abilities scale off of bonus AD, and since the brunt of our damage is dealt in the first few seconds, First Strike's slight damage amplification on top of the free gold that we get from the rune is exactly what we're looking for. After all, the yellow tree was available to Kayle back when she ran Kleptomancy, so based on that extremely flawed logic and completely ignoring everything that made Kleptomancy overpowered that isn't available now, First Strike is the keystone of the evening. Perfect Timing, Cosmic Insight, and Minion Dematerializer are the follow-up runes that feel the best to me. Some might argue for Time Warp Tonic, but that's usually best reserved for champions that will also build Corrupting Potion first. Don't. I've also opted out of Slightly Magical Boots because Kayle's lack of kill pressure in general versus her need to compensate for lack of mobility via movement speed is too great of a contrast to overlook. Plus, rushing tier 2 boots on Kayle isn't a terrible idea, and having to wait until the 12-minute mark to get boots is more awkward than I'd like. Cosmic Insight is there because each aspect of it benefits Kayle in some way. Item Haste, Gale forces off of cooldown slightly more often. Summoner Spell Haste, Kayle has quicker access to Teleport or Ignite and Flash. For secondary issues, I was having issues deciding between a few of them. With Kayle's regular build, most people opt in for Resolve, taking Overgrowth and Bone Plating for more overall tankiness and survivability. Personally though, I found the most success running Precision secondary, with Triumph and Legend Alacrity as the primary runes there, but I could have just as easily taken any other one of these. The other concern with this build specifically comes in how poor its sustain is. As limited as Kayle can be, the regular AP build gives her a decent amount of healing from Riftmaker and the scaling on her W. And I just have to say, it's a real shame that there isn't a crit item that gives lifesteal and a shield that automatically pops at low health to help mitigate her lack of survivability in early game. That item would just be ridiculously overpowered. With that weird non sequitur out of the way, I could see an argument being made for Taste of Blood and Ingenious Hunter or Legend Bloodline over Alacrity, but in my opinion the first option falls off incredibly hard late game and the second one is just nice to have, I guess. Sorcery is absolutely useless though. Do not fall for the trap that is Gathering Storm. For her abilities, I max Q first and then E. It may seem a bit backwards, seeing as the E passive damage goes up by 5 every level and contributes greatly to the strength of Kayle in general. What I personally find is that Kayle's Q is great for wave clear and poke, as by the time that she hits level 9, the ability does around 250 damage in a small AoE on its own, which, yeah, it's not great, but I'd much rather have my wave cleared out and my opponent slowed for 50% than do an extra 20 damage on hit at level 9. Another fun fact about Kayle's E is that the execute damage only scales with AP, so even if we put points into it, the stats that we're building don't really contribute to that aspect at all. And yes, the level of Kayle's E increases the damage that her regular passive does as well, but what's the point of maxing it first if the waves don't even come out for another 2 levels anyway? The main reason you max E on regular Kayle is because the on-hit damage is enough to clear caster minions under tower, but with Noon Quiver in this build, we're already doing that as a baseline. Oh no, if we max E second, we're doing 10 less damage per wave at level 11. How could I ever cope? Overall, the game plan with this build is to scale aggressively, bully our opponent in lane, and become the carry deleting, instant wave clearing menace that we were always meant to be. And that's about all I have to say about this build. I'd like to thank Skooch for taking the time to feature in this video and indulge me in my off-meta Kayle build. It was super fun getting this collaboration to work. There's a bronze Theorycrafting video over on his channel that also partially covers this build, and it may feature yours truly, but you'd have to watch the video to find out. Subscribe to Skooch because I've heard that the majority of people over there are not subscribed, and, you know, while we're here, the reason why YouTubers ask for subscriptions is because YouTube takes a viewer's choice to interact with the channel, be it subscribing, commenting, or liking as a sign of the channel's overall positive health, causing them to be recommended to more people and grow their channel even further. But that's all I have for this video. I've been Sojourner Kai, safe travels, and goodbye.